Face front, true believers. Blue Dragon 5 here.
And Rohith.
And Jacob Weil.
Ladies and gentlemen, it truly saddens me to report the death of another Marvel great. John Romita Sr. has passed at the rightful age of 93, peacefully in his sleep, thank goodness. Word came down yesterday, I believe last night, from his son, John Romita Jr. And it's sad. We're losing. And thank goodness thank goodness these pillars of creativity are kind of passing in kind of like in their golden years, opposed to the other tragedies in which we lose our comic greats far younger. But still, we've lost the staples of the comic book, if you will. We're losing all of our staples, and it's sad. It's a thing we never really envisioned, because the characters and the creations and the contributions are kind of living on, and that's kind of what we're aiming to do tonight. We're here less kind of like less kind of drowning in the darkness. We're kind of lighting some candles to kind of pay tribute, some candles and this nostalgic memories, and just kind of like appreciating the journey and the legacy of this great man. And that's what we're here to do. We're here to kind of reminisce and get some thoughts and feelings and maybe some memories, and just kind of like again overall it's a little celebration of the man's life amongst us, and maybe amongst anyone who's joining us here tonight. So that's what we're doing. So I guess we should probably go around and maybe say anything. I don't know if usually we kind of ask about like initial reactions to the news, but either that or just in general, like any profound memories or kind of feelings you have towards Mr. Ramita Senior. Rohit.
Upon hearing upon his death, it was sad, but I think the consolation of him having lived such a long life, especially being a person from the comic book industry, as some or many of you may know, there's no health insurance. So for comic book writers and artists and inkers and whatnot, you kind of really have to just trudge it out and hope to have sufficient funds and all that stuff. And but Ramita Senior, thankfully, was able to live, a comfortable life and live to the age of 93, which is very much beating the actuarial tables in the United States. But outside just sort of the contemplation about his death and his life, I think to the fact that with the images that are portrayed as I'm seeing it and what the audience is seeing, Rumini Sr. was so pivotal in terms of drawing not just specific covers or specific moments, but defining a look for Spider-Man that feels so iconic and essential that if you were to think about, all right, how would Spider-Man just look when people just ask, okay, what does Spider-Man look like in your head? Remedial Senior's look for the character is certainly one of the, if not the most definitive image of who Spider-Man is, and his rogues gallery, his supporting cast, and just the overall look and feel of the world. So, I, in summation, will say that Remedial Senior has created a lasting legacy as an artist, and has actually co-created a few characters that we can get into more later on, that whose legacies are to this day very profound and within the comics and outside of comics and other media. So I tip my hat to the legacy of Ramirez Sr., to what he strived for, to what he's contributed in the comic space, and hope that others may be inspired by his work and just the massive impact he's had among readers, old and new.
Jacob, do you have any thoughts?
Like, well, my thoughts won't be as like probably deep as you guys, and I won't have much to contribute to this overall. But of course, I'm familiar. Of course, but of course, as I've more steeped myself into the realm of comic culture, I of course became very familiar with both Romita Senior and Junior. But of course, I can't deny wide range of influence that Romita Senior's had. I mean, especially considering that the No More thing has of course been referenced in Spider-Man media all the way from back when it introduced it, even a movie that just came out a couple weeks ago. His legacy is definitely far-reaching. Like you can feel his influences in almost every Spider-Man adaptation there ever was. Like probably as much as if not as much as Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. Like he helped defeat. You can say he helped define what as Rohith said, what Spider-Man would look like and everything. So, and of course, like with his hands in other creations such as the Kingpin, helping with Daredevil, and seminal moments across the Marvel universe. It's just like one can't deny his influence. So, as Dragon has pointed out, he lost a pillar of the comic book industry, and it is obviously quite sad to see one go. But he lived to be 96, almost 93, almost 93 and a half years old. So you can't deny that he's lived a full life. So thank you for everything, John Romita Sr.
Yes. So of course, Romita, as we're going to get into, I mean, just pretty much like the definitive. I mean, it's always up for grabs, obviously, but I think most people would agree, and definitely Marvel Comics would agree for many decades. Romita Sr. was the definitive Spider-Man artist. Like when you saw, like if you looked up a picture of Spider-Man, chances are, I mean, if you didn't see Steve Ditko in terms of like the early stuff with Spider-Man, or like just that amazing fantasy cover, what you're going to see is John Romita Sr. His version of Spider-Man, because that was pretty much like as admitted by everyone, it's like essentially became the company mascot. Like every time they mass marketed something with Spider-Man, it was Romita Sr. It was his style. So again, the iconography on what he did is not to be believed in terms of the stay power he had, and what we're going to get into with his career, just like the kind of the layers of like how he kind of arrived at that point of just becoming so synonymous with the character. And Spider-Man wasn't even his favorite character, which is kind of funny how that works out. Yet he did so much great stuff with him. But the thing I want to share about Romita Sr. is that I actually met him once. Yeah, I met him once at Comic Con, and it was almost by accident, to be frank. I mean, I believe I was intending on seeing him. I'm pretty sure, because I mean, I don't know why else would I have the book to get signed by him. But it was the year Stan Lee was there, so I had a book for Stan Lee to sign. I forget if I was. This is very far back, so I can't recall if it was like I I knew Romita Jr. was there. I was looking forward to seeing Romita Jr. I don't know if Romita Sr. just kind of slipped past, or I was like confusing the senior junior thing, like I think so many of us do, like now every time we're typing in stuff for Romita. But yeah, I was there to see Stan Lee, and then by proxy Romita Jr. And essentially I had stuff for Stan Lee to sign, and I kind of realized, like, oh God, this is while waiting, I guess in between things, I just kind of noticed, like, egad, there's John Romita Sr. He's just there, and there's like no line or anything. And I just walked up to him. And he's very, very kindly man, and I had with me my collection of basically the Romita era Spider-Man stuff, the Marvel Masterworks, the hardback. And it's so funny, if I recall, I could be wrong here. I'm pretty sure I got this when I was in Florida, where the Spider-Man ride was, which has like a little built-in comic shop and stuff in there. I think that's where I got it from. Now, like, if I were to associate a memory there, I'm just going to go on a limb. It was either there or maybe a Barnes and Nobles. I'm going to assume it was there.
Okay.
So yeah. The point being, this book, at the very least, I assume it was there because I remember I would bring this thing on trips to. I remember reading through that book when I was on the plane ride from Florida to home. So my assumption is that it must have been where I got it from. Anyway, so a lovely man, he's signed the book, and again, it's just like one of those things where nowadays, like, you have to wait in line, so many guys charge and everything. But Rita Senior was a class act, and it's very nice, and of course very important. Of course, I told him how much Spider-Man No More meant and all that sort of stuff, as we all feel, and yeah, it's it is very sad to see him go. Just given just how much of an impact he has had on both some of our favorite characters between Spider-Man and Daredevil, particularly. I mean, again, these two characters, they are not at all what they are today without what Romita Sr. did. He's very much, I mean, again, the equivocation I'd have is that he's the Jack Kirby for those characters. You know, I mean, I get the analogy I'd have is like if Jack Kirby's the king of comics, John Romita Sr. he's the prince of comics. Yeah,
That's a good way of going about that.
that's the thing because he did mentor a lot of people. He mentored a lot of artists and everything. So he had an impact like Jack, but he wasn't like heralded as like the guy. It's like like he's like the end all be all between both industries. But yeah.
And like I said, Romita's influence can be seen as like as far back from when the comic was made, like I said, to even movie that was literally just released a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, canon events. Like now we have like a full-on term for that with Spider-Man, and of course, half of those moments are John Romita Sr. moments. All right, so
So basically, he's the architect of Spider-Man's misery.
Pretty much, yeah. A lot of death.
They could also be tied to whoever wrote those events too. At that point,
Yeah.
Oh, that is true. We're going to get into it though. Romita is responsible for one very iconic event, but we'll build there. I want to start up before we get into the meat and potatoes of Daredevil and Spider-Man here. I want to just kind of highlight something. So it's interesting though, looking at the kind of work that he did. So Romita started, in the 50s, which was kind of like the dead era for comics. Like the 50s is like the worst era for comics in the sense of this was not like worse and that it was like the worst, like terrible work was turned out, but just in terms of like the popularity of comics and what was going on. Because the 50s was kind of like the lull between superheroes for comics, because you had like the birth of them in the golden age of comics in between the late 30s and the 40s. Then you have wartime to kind of carry it through.
Yeah, like after World War II, the interest in superhero comics kind of waned a little bit.
Exactly, because you had comics had quite the boom in the 40s because again everyone was like patriotic and in the middle of the war effort and everything. It was like care packages and all sorts of the wartime was huge for comics, but also so aproposly the end of comics because all the paper that was recycled. Comics. That's why comics are hard to find. That's why they're expensive because all the classic ones got destroyed.
So no one thought about preservation back then.
No, they didn't. So it's a double-edged sword. Like, hey, let's support the war effort to like let's make ourselves an endangered species. And then, of course, I won't bore you with the whole history of comics because folks probably know that already. But let's just say, in the 50s, the superheroes kind of went by the wayside, not just because of the war effort, but also like there was like an attack on comics in terms of are they sending bad messages and a whole bunch of dumb stuff thanks to Frederick Wortham. But again, people know this stuff. The fact is, what you did have in the interim were non kind of like fighty fight sort of comics, but you had you had romance comics, you had genre comics, you had like kind of stuff filling the interim, and you had the occasional like kind of round superhero comics like apparently Romita Sr. He worked on some of the Captain America stuff early on, kind of like Stan Lee did. Stan Lee's big break in the Marvel technically was working on Captain America, writing a few Cap stories. Romita did something similar with the art style.
First, before you continue, we have Theme Park Priest in the comments.
Yes, the characters.
The characters he designed, we are still benefiting from to this day.
Yeah. So that's the thing. So believe it or not, Romita, very briefly, if I understand correctly, he was with DC just for just this brief string of time, and then he basically went to Marvel and never looked back as a freelancer, if I understand it, where he basically did, I think, a few spare Batman stories, probably in the 50s, the same way he did Cap. And then you had, the romance comics so that's one the point I'm trying to make for what's going to happen is the guy excelled at melodrama and appealing characters and designing females, and all this would obviously, be a great benefit to him when he introduces certain characters, and when we kind of like into the melodrama of Spider-Man, which is kind of the cornerstone of that character.
Spider-Man's life is a soap opera.
Yep. So all that leads to him getting this big break on Avengers 23, which is a Kang comic, by the way. I don't think it's the intro. I don't know if it's the introduction to Kang or not, but he was there. He was there during some Kang stuff.
And again, something that came out just this year.
Yeah. So that brings us to so let's see. So that brings us to how we get on to Daredevil. So Stan Lee basically seduced him onto Daredevil. That's essentially what happened here. Where Romita had almost kind of similar to Stan Lee, a lot of parallels to Stan Lee, and very kind of tragic and apropos here, where it's like this week we're supposed to get hopefully a really good Stan Lee documentary, and I don't know if it's going to go over any of this as well, fitting it in there, but. It's just kind of interesting that there were some parallels to Stan Lee in terms of Stan when he made his biggest breaks in comics, he was thinking about hanging, he was giving up, he was thinking about quitting because the stories he wanted to tell weren't being told. And Romita Sr. here, he was thinking about not retiring completely, but kind of shifting from penciling, kind of essentially retiring from penciling to inking entirely. Which he started as an inker with the Avengers comic. He wasn't full on doing pencils on it. And Stan Lee basically he asked his thoughts on kind of some struggling Daredevil artists. Is like, what would you do with this page? And then basically, or made a senior like on a whim. He basically like laid out some tracing paper and he basically sketched on top of it. And that's where he got the he basically had some dynamic Daredevil art. Essentially, the first. I mean, I don't know how technically you want to be here because of the whole inking versus kind of penciling thing, but essentially the first Marvel character since Cap that he drew, like the first like in the Marvel era, in the '60s onward era that he drew. It was Daredevil right then and there before Stan the Man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, basically he got kind of put onto the Daredevil book, and he fell in love with the character. Yeah, and I guess with the mentorship of it all, I mean, Jack Kirby kind of had to show him the ropes early on Daredevil, basically kind of help him get like dynamic action in there. Because I mean, Romita again was more of like with the romance comics, I guess he was a little bit more just kind of stationary in terms of like how can we keep like a two character scene as interesting looking as possible, and he could excel at that. But in terms of Daredevil jumping out a window, he needed Jack Kirby to kind of give him a few little pointers, and it went a long way. It did. Yeah. So, yeah.
I said,
Okay. So, yeah, so that brings us to, I mean, Rohit, but feel free to jump in here if you want, if you want to talk about some Daredevil stuff, because we're going to break that down for a bit.
No, I think what was interesting is that when he did his time in Daredevil, I think there was like one issue where Spider-Man made an appearance, and that kind of just was a bit of an interesting segue to sort of the defining part of Romita's legacy, his collaboration with Spider-Man. Because to my understanding, just looking at what I've heard and read through, is that when Rubina was coming in, there was a bit of a estrangement, for lack of a better term, for between Lee and Ditko.
Yeah.
So Rubina already having a working relationship with Stan Lee, Stan Lee gave Rubina the job, and from there, just was such a pivotal part about the transition. Because for Stan, because when you think about it, Steve Ditko, when you see his art for Amazing Fantasy and for Amazing Spider-Man, it's very angular. It's very just sort of avant-garde, a little bit more claustrophobic. Kind of has influences of horror or whatnot. So more gangly. Peter's more just kind of how you would think of like someone who is a nerd, or just kind of a meek individual, gaining powers and all that stuff.
I mean, it is very Spider-Man Year One to a degree,
Yeah,
which makes
absolutely.
sense given it's the creation of the character. But yeah, it's if you see like a green character versus like a thought out, like this guy's at the top of his game.
Yeah, and then I think what is you know convenient, and all the stars aligning for Ramita when he's coming in. Peter is, I think, within the early issues of his college run, and Ramita having a romance background really kind of. I think what's funny when people compare how Steve Ditko drew Peter versus how John Romita Sr. drew him. The joke is that like, oh, John Romita took Spider-Man uptown, that like he beat him up and made him look like, oh, he a ladies man or someone that could attract a lot of women. and it is kind of night and day when you think about it, and was sort of an interesting, transition point from Spider-Man, specifically Peter Parker, being sort of this very when you read the Steve Ditko issues for this high school run. What's interesting is that as compared to how media adaptations have of Spider-Man's high school career or high school period, Peter's relatively, doesn't have much of a supporting. Well, he has a supporting cast, but doesn't really have much friends. He has just like Flash, who's constantly tortures him, or the Pauper kids make fun of him or are antagonistic towards him, even when he becomes Spider-Man. And when he goes to college, is when he makes actual friends with people like Harry Osborn, Gwen Stacy,
Deb
and Mary.
Whitman. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, that's the thing. So you're right though, in that we do. One of the things with the melodrama is that again, like it's Peter Parker, becoming the babe magnet. Essentially, it's when you have, it's when you have like all the many love interests of Spider-Man. It's when you really get into.
Well, I mean, yeah, the thing is with Peter being in college, it was sort of a natural transition to where Peter goes from this like awkward nerdy guy in high school to kind
To
of
big man on campus.
reinvent himself. I mean, he's been Spider-Man for a while, so maybe a headcanon is that like, oh, he's gotten in a better shape, or he's gotten just more confident and willing to talk to women. And with college settings, it's funny when nowadays when we talk about sort of melodrama, and we talk about how like teen shows or teen dramas are really melodramatic and whatnot. And shows that are set in college periods aren't really perceived in a melodramatic light. It's relatively light drama or more comedy oriented. So with Peter, being in college, struggling to make ends meet, trying to balance relationships, the whole tensions of trying to be both Peter Parker and Spider-Man are heightened. And John Romita Sr., being the artist he is, having a romance comics background, was able to deliver on sort of the displaying character emotion through facial expressions, through how characters are aligned in the panel. Specifically, when you look at like Peter walking away, the way it's all any other artist could just really super emphasize the closing in on the costume, the closing in Peter, but just the way the shot is laid out and the shadow work. It's Ramita just knows how to.
It makes you
Like,
feel something.
yeah, it's melodrama is there's often a charged term, as in that for an artist to really delve into the emotional substance of a thing, it can come off as maudlin or cloying or really overly sentimental. But Romita Sr., being the artist that he was, knew how to convey emotion that felt authentic and restrained in the way that just characters were laid out on the page. And I'm just thinking, just looking at the image that you all have here, he was just great in terms of the tears work, in terms of the covers work, and just a single panel is just iconic. And I think to Mary Jane's appearance and just the way that like there's no background behind her, it's just all yellow with just like black lines, as if like, oh, she's just like a gift from God, or there's a light bulb was flashing and
Well, she's
truly,
the jackpot. She's at the end of the
exactly,
rainbow. Yeah, she's
exactly.
yeah. So that's the thing. So let's see. So sorry, I was trying to. Oh, right. So that's the thing. So when you look at the kind of the stay power of Ramita's work, you have like it's kind of the Spider-Man the animated series era from the '90s with the whole college years on Spider-Man. It's a little bit of that. It's a little bit of like in Spider-Man 2. We're in kind of like we're keeping the motorbike. We're keeping up. We're doing an adaptation of Spider-Man No More, which of course, as Rohit's kind of laid out there, it's a an iconic, literal canon level event thanks to the Spider Verse movie. But yeah, it's iconic. It's the fact that it's the Spider-Man costume in the trash. It's just it's this dramatic, perfect image that summarizes what the issue is here. What it's like. Oh God, our hero has given up. The costume he's leaving it behind him. He's walking away from it. Look at the cover of the comic. It's it's him turning his back on Spider-Man. And we
So
kind of see the yeah.
Yeah,
And
to add on to
I'm sorry, one interruption at a time, please. Go
so-
on.
well, you were done talking, but
Well, I was still going, but keep going. Yeah, what do you got?
and I was saying like the animated series, like he wasn't involved in that, but you can tell his fingerprints are basically all over that. like like in terms of like the visual design, the way some shots are staged, like they're totally taking influence from Romita in that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it's. I mean, honestly, the thing too with series, probably one of my favorite comics of all time is Amazing Spider-Man number 50. I mean, just for so many reasons, but I mean, I do have. It was always my dream comic to get, and I was able to get my hands on it. I mean, sadly, I was never able to see Romita Senior again. Again, I got him to sign kind of the collected version of it, but still, I mean, oh boy, what I'd give for him to sign the the actual Spider-Man No More comic. That would have been something special. But yeah, it was just this insanely good idea between him and Lee. Just the idea of like, what if Spider-Man, just gave up after all the pressures. That was what the Romita run was all about. It was all about kind of Spider-Man facing the pressures of real life after we take away what seemingly was the cushion of high school. And yeah, it just seems like we keep revisiting that because there's something really. It's kind of a universal idea about the hero giving up, but we've never like been able to pare it down to like one image that just summarizes it so perfectly. And again, it stands to reason. It's why it's a hallmark.
to add on to that, just to add on to sort of the analysis of the moment, what's I think significant is you think back to sort of what made Stanley wanting to create Spider-Man and him writing Spider-Man the way he did was that beforehand, superheroes when they started on the golden age, they were just one dimensional or two dimensional, basically flat representations of just individuals that were in certain jobs who the main thrust of it was just that there were superheroes doing fighting crime and whatnot. There wasn't an interior life. There wasn't a sense of the person behind the mask, the costume. And with Stan Lee coming in and creating Spider-Man, him having a supporting cast, him having money troubles, and him having wants and desires out of instead of being just a superhero, with Romita being coming to the picture and him having the romance comics background and sort of the sense of melodrama. Peter, this image of the costume being down the dumpster and all that stuff is so pivotal because when you think to sort of moments or stories where like the hero gives up the mantle and like walks away and all that, there's always the Civil Rage covers are just like a lot of like war balloons and character tagging very animated expressions or ripping the costume or throwing in the bin or something like that. What's great about this moment is that you don't see Peter's face. You see just the back of him.
It's a reveal. It's a dramatic reveal. Of like, oh God, no, he's ditched the costume, but we didn't like ham it up in doing so. It's just kind of like a sad realization.
Yeah, and the way that the costume's kind of laid up, it's just you really feel that this is just a costume, like it's it's just something that is just tossed away, just as you toss away like old clothes or just old records or whatnot. So
Yeah.
and I think there's something so
It's like putting the American flag in the trash or something.
yeah, or just like dumping like American apple pie or whatever. Just
Sure. Yeah.
so.
So yeah, let's see. So, but yeah, I guess just to go back just for a moment. Just yeah, again. So the big Spider-Man Daredevil crossover. This is Enter the Spider-Man. I think is what the story is, which is of course kind of a fun title, just given the whole Enter the Spider, into the Spider Verse and everything. So anyway, so Enter the Spider-Man. As you said, Rohith, it was basically him kind of replacing Ditko after essentially Ditko. He was on Spider-Man for 38 issues. Of course, issue I think it was 30 or 33 is like the big he's lifting the heavy the heavy metal stuff off of him while he's in like the moment that we put in Homecoming. He's lifting the
Yeah, the
giant
machine.
machinery off.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Ditko is kind of like, to me though. I mean, I know there's like a few issues after that, but it feels like to me that's like if you kind of look at kind of like the big events that we kind of look at these, if we kind of end big on these runs like that's Spider-Man's big determining, like it's kind of like him transitioning into the Romita stuff to a degree. And it's so interesting that you know Romita very hesitantly took on the book. He was always looking at it as a temporary gig, and when he realized like basically was in a pinch, and Stanley pretty much like all but begged him practically like, come on, dude, try it out for a bit. And essentially what he did was he imitated Ditko's style to kind of pay tribute to the artist and try to like again, assuming it was going to be a temporary gig for the next guy in line to figure out what he wants to do. He's just trying to imitate Ditko's style. So it was like there's like a little inclination of Ramita, and basically as he got more comfortable and realized this is not like a temporary gig, he then found his confidence to do his full on style, which gave that new dynamic look to Spider-Man. Yeah. So so yeah, that's the thing. I mean, like Daredevil, it's kind of funny how like things would grow on him over time because Daredevil became his favorite character after 6 months working on the character. I mean, even if Spider-Man did not surpass the love he had for Daredevil, it does stand the reason that he did a lot of work for Spider-Man. That's a character he doesn't love. I mean, that's saying something. If he turned out that good work for something that was like not something he felt like he was taken away from Daredevil. He wanted to be on there for more, and he was like put on Spider-Man. Like I don't want Spider-Man, and look what he did.
I think from what I understand, Ramita definitely appreciates like his work, but I
Yeah,
don't.
no, no. I'm not saying he dislikes Spider-Man. I'm just
Yeah,
saying that it's like not quite like like I think he said like once like he feels Daredevil potentially is like the best Marvel character ever. But then I just think it's interesting the fact they kind of grew to love something, kind of like he probably grew to love Spider-Man.
hmm
Yeah.
yeah.
So
You
speaking,
always kind of wonder for an alternate universe where Ramita had like as lengthy of a run on Daredevil as he did in Spider Man, like how Daredevil would be defined by Ramita's pencils.
that's the thing. Like, do you think there's a world where Daredevil becomes like the mascot of Marvel the way that Spider-Man did?
I don't think. I think
If
no.
he stayed on though.
I think he would certainly, you know, I think he would certainly get more popularity. I think it would be kind of like sort of an X-Men situation for Claremont, where it's like they really, have high sales and all that stuff. But I think Spider-Man, just in terms of his costume, just in terms of the look, it's
Yeah,
like
even in the Ditko era, there is that universal quality to Spider-Man. So I guess that's kind of like that. There's your brand recognition there for you. So that makes sense. He probably still would
absolutely,
be. Yeah.
absolutely, and he was popular from the get-go. Whereas for
Yeah.
Daredevil, it's like he didn't really get sort of the notoriety or the respect among most comic readers till Miller came into the picture.
So speaking of which, let's talk about some of the contributions, the major contributions that Ramita had between both of them. But primarily, let's start with we got to start with the Kingpin. We got to
Mhm.
talk about the Kingpin. So, Kingpin, like he's gone on record of saying, I like to think this still remained true after all these years that Kingpin was his favorite creation ever. And I mean, of course, Kingpin is just is a wonderful character. Of course, he's gone to such heights thanks to Vincent D'Onofrio. But even before then, just Roscoe Lee Brown is his turn on the Kingpin, inspiring the animated series, which again, very Romita influenced series. Just
And not to
just
mention the Michael Clark Duncan from the Daredevil movie.
well, well, sure, yeah.
I mean,
And
still, I mean, that might not be the best movie, but it's still iconic in some ways.
Well, yeah, yes, Jacob, yeah. So the point being is the Kingpin is a remarkable character, and one of the reasons he is a remarkable character is the fact that I love the idea that Ramita what he actually did was he's gone on record kind of like saying like in the creation of the Kingpin. Up to this point, you had characters like I think the Big Man was a character at this point, which is like Frederick Foswell or someone. At this point, but you had like a little skinny guy with a mustache and an eye patch. You had like these little skinny, just kind of like criminal types as like the big crime boss characters Spider-Man would go up against in the Ditko era. So it was like, hey, let's. It kind of worked like the classic Marvel method, like we had with Jack Kirby and Stanley, in which Stanley would kind of outline generally what he wanted, and then he would leave it up to the artist's discretion to really kind of interpret what that means, and Stan would add the dialogue balloons and kind of after that, and then more so in this case, Stanley gave him like a post-it note or something. Says, "We're going to do a character called the Kingpin," and what was probably not real, was like, "Figure out what that is." And he did, and of course he was. I'm gonna make him. I'm gonna make him huge. I'm making him like a big old Wall Street guy, and he's gonna be all fancy, but he can fight Spider-Man. He'll be huge. And he did, and it was great. And then the fact that the Kingpin is it's so funny. Three Romita signature characters all have the Kingpin as an enemy because you have Spider Man, you have Daredevil. Majorly is like pretty much the arch nemesis to the Kingpin, depending on who you ask,
Mm-hmm.
and the Punisher. A little less the Punisher, but the Punisher has had run-ins with them, so it's
Yeah, I
not.
guess that's
Yeah,
yeah. Um, yeah, I think for Kingpin, I think I'm just looking at the cover that you have on for the or our title card. It just the way Ramita has like Kingpin swinging Spider Man. You can see the swoosh. It is just such a like you can tell that Ramita's having a lot of fun and having the Kingpin around and just sort of the way he moves. There's just a lot of
there's actually a little personal touch to this too. I actually have I picked that comic for two reasons. One, it's again the first appearance of the Kingpin is in uh, Amazing Spider-Man number 50, because he
Mhm.
basically appears like they kind of build him up at the very end, kind of like you do like Wolverine in 180 of the Incredible Hulk, or you do like in like Mary Jane, just way back, and I think it's like Amazing 25.
Mhm.
So so he was introduced then, but I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was a thing where he was kind of like again built up in shadow and stuff, kind of like we did in the first season of Daredevil for 3 episodes. It was kind of built up for a while until at the very least, even if we did see him, this is the first time he interacted with Spider-Man. This is like the first time they fought, and
Yeah.
they have like the big fight scene. But also the secondary reason I went with this is that I have this comic and I had signed by Stan Lee when I saw him way back.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's the thing. Unfortunately, the comic was in like the worst like graded condition ever. That's the only way I can get my hands on something like cool like that. But it was an excuse to meet Stan Lee, so I'm not
Mhm.
complaining.
What's also cool and just thinking about like Kingpin is that gone in 2018, it was it was an interesting year for Kingpin. Is that he was the major antagonist in Daredevil season 3. He was in the Spider-Man PS4 game, and
Mm-hmm.
he was also in Into the Spider-Verse.
Oh yeah, though you're right. 2018 is a big year for the Kingpin. Wow. Yeah, I kind of forgot there for a second. Yep, all three of them, same year.
Yeah, and considering like just and this is outside of comics, and considering comics like from in John Romita creating Kingpin to him being transitioned to being a Daredevil villain, and his pivotal moments with Miller, with Bendis, with Brubaker, and just now like Kingpin is still running around in Daredevil comics and being a thorn in his side, and all just because of John Romita's contributions to the character.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, so let's see. So again, just the dazzling visual, just seeing those two kind of mix it up too. Is the idea you have like this large, just seemingly a businessman, who can actually, because they have that awesome reveal that he's actually like has like what is it, 2% muscle? Sorry, not the 2% fat, in which the majority of his body is actually well trained muscle. So he's
It's
incredibly
it's
strong.
when saying that out loud, it just sounds dumb, but because it's comics, it sounds awesome. Like when you see just like
When Roscoe Lee Brown said that line, when he gave voice to that line, it was like that was awesome.
it's yeah, it's such a goofy thing, but just the way the character is just shows up, and it was just interesting for like obviously probably Spider-Man makes jokes about his weight and all that stuff, but in just looking at just thinking to how like John Romita portrays the Kingpin, like there is a level of tremendous grandeur like based on his stature, and it like the Kingpin is not displayed as a joke, and
Oh, it's like
he
what if Sidney Greenstreet were in ridiculously good shape? He'd be the Kingpin.
yeah,
Yeah,
and it's kind of a continuation from sort of what stuff that Lee and Ditko did because it was a great point that was made by someone who was analyzing throughout the pivotal Stan Lee run was that uh, for in this Ditko era, the tone of the comics one could say was that in the high school periods, it was like a breezy comedy. And where Peter was in on the joke that he's Spider Man and nobody else, and he was just kind of messing with people.
yeah.
But as Spider Man, it was a full on crime drama with like the Crime Master saga with all the different gangsters that Spider-Man was fighting, and all these criminals with hoodlums, stealing robbery, and then leading to Romita Sr. being on the book and creating the ultimate mob boss, the ultimate figure of crime and kingpin. It's these contributions that have deepened the character of Spider-Man, that have expanded the world, and with a character like Kingpin being as pivotal as he is in comics and outside media, it's goes to show sort of how for any particular person, especially like John Romita, to just be creative, be sort of imaginative, and create a character such as Kingpin. It's just a testament to his creativity and just his strength as a storyteller.
Yeah. I mean, one of the other kind of in conjunction with that too is the fact that you have like I remember there was this great Spider-Man documentary. That of course now it's very outdated, but it's really good. So I think Spider-Man mythology of the 21st century or 20. Yeah, I think it's 21st century. And essentially, you have like all these great kind of insights on Spider-Man. Like people asking like, who your favorite villains are and everything. I think I forget if it was Romita Jr. or not, but I think Jr. said oddly about his father's work in a sense that you love the Kingpin because the Kingpin can conjure any supervillain that he needs. And with that, you have in that era, you have Rhino and Shocker, of course. Now, when you look at the kind of adaptations of things, it's kind of with the adaptation of things. What you have is like the Black Suit Saga, in which you have the Rhino and Shocker, and of course, a very meme-worthy thing that we're all waiting for in this new game, apparently. The whole Shocker, I'll chase you to the ends of the earth.
Yeah, it's and I just think it was just an animation. Like Kingpin was in the Spider-Man animated series. He was in the MTV Spider-Man as sort of the taking the Michael Clark Duncan version. He was, I think, they Greg Weisman wanted to have him as the crime boss in Spectacular, but couldn't because of legal reasons, the
Yeah,
legal rights
sadly.
situation, and so they had to bring in Tombstone, and Tombstone's great, but it's very telling just how much Kingpin is so utilized in Spider-Man media,
Because it's a
even
villain
though
that Spider-Man can't really defeat, even if he can beat him in a fight. That's the fascinating thing.
yeah, and also like you mentioned, like he brings in other villains to like, oh, kill Spider-Man and I'll pay you $1 million, or like he like funds the gives the money to do the experiments, and actually, since this is relevant, in the
Mhm.
comics, one scientist was working for him, got unlucky, and became the character that we know as the Spot, who
Uh-huh.
made his big appearance in Across the Spider Verse, and actually kind of had a similar origin to his version of the comic. So, really, Ramita, just in creating this one character, has generated so much stories and story potential in comics and in other media, which is such, you know,
Yeah, no, for sure. I meant to say we have like these villains. Basically, again, like Rhino and Shocker, they're goons with really great gimmicks, essentially. But again, it's the gimmicks that made him stand the test of time. Versus, like, here's a guy like who basically has like this yellow net look to him, and he can shoot like sound waves, essentially, or like kind of blast.
mhm.
The Rhino again, Rhino or out of context, ridiculous costume, but again adds like the whole animal gimmick with Spider-Man. Let's see. So a few others to highlight here, so we can get to like maybe some of our less villainous characters. We have like Bullseye and Gladiator, for example, Daredevil characters that are going to have had great great prominence in the Netflix Daredevil, the Marvel, the kind of our MCU version.
Mhm.
And of course, yeah, Bullseye in general. Bullseye is always great for all the stuff he pops up in because one, he can have like really twisted versions of Bullseye, and usually we always end up like a really twisted version of Bullseye, just in different ways. We have kind of the obsessive compulsive version in the Daredevil series, and we have the Punisher Max series. You have like the most twisted version of Bullseye ever. and all because like Romita and Rudy's kind of figuring out like this is how we would kind of give like a guy's like a perfect marksman, kind of like a kind of a scary look to him, and then we would kind of like interpret like how does a guy like that act after a while. So again, he laid the groundwork, and he gave kind of like kind of Daredevil kind of like an equivalent, like Daredevil's one of the rare villains who has like Daredevil, one of the characters in which I guess it's not super rare, but it's the idea like with Batman's synonymous only with the Joker in terms of like the arch nemesis. Then you have like Spider-Man, where it's kind of a three-way battle between three, and then with Daredevil, it's kind of a two-way battle between Kingpin and Bullseye, who's the arch enemy. No, so I'm just kind of thinking out loud on the Bullseye point there, but regardless, the point is he gives us Bullseye and he gives us Gladiator. It was, of course, Gladiator's Melvin, the guy who built the Daredevil costume. How nice.
Yeah, I think just when you look at the design of you know Ramita's Bullseye, there's just a cool you know quality to where having the literal bullseye on the forehead and just see the all black with sort of the tasteful white accentuations on the upper torso and the hands and the legs, like it's such a cool look. And whenever artists or whenever people want to deviate from the look, it's kind of just a temporary, or people were just really frothing them out to go back to that classic costume because it's such an iconic look, and it's still a look that Bullseye's has even in modern day comics. And hopefully, whenever Bullseye shows up in the MCU, hopefully he has a comic guy costume. But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
I do want to bring up sort of characters from the Spider-Man realm of things. Captain George Stacy, he co-created that character, and funny enough, he is a specifically mentioned plot point in Across the Spider-Verse.
Yeah, I gotta be honest. The more we talk about this, the more I just keep looking. I hope to God Romita Sr. was allowed to see, like, Across the Spider Verse. I really hope so.
I hope so, but I think what's interesting about this character George Stacy, um, the way in which he's presented the comics and the look and all that, he's kind of the elderly police detective who's an ally of Spider-Man. He is kind of anything the Commissioner Gordon before Commissioner Gordon. Like how we conceive of Gordon wasn't really much of a thing for most of Batman's run until maybe sometime in the 70s, if not the early to mid 80s. And
I mean, it depends on how you look at the way in which, like, basically doing it kind of this George Stacy esque route that you're applying is definitely the 70s, but technically, we're still doing the 60s Batman thing where the Batman is reporting to Gordon in the 60s, so it's kind of there, but you're right, it's not to the same degree.
Yeah, I just thinking more about just the personal, like it's not just like here's the cop guide that just say, hey, Spider-Man, here's this. It's like there's George Stacy being the father of Gwen Stacy, the love of Spider-Man's life at one time. There's a personal connection there that wasn't prevalent for Gordon and Batman at the time.
You're right.
But
at least it shouldn't be. We'll say that much.
Yeah, but in his death, the night that Captain Stacy dies, and it's just kind of funny to think about the fact that he was the one to suggest to Jerry Conway that Gwen Stacy should die. And it's like, God, Romita, do you just have it out for the Stacys?
They actually had a really good reason as to why, though. It was a very simple reason. So essentially, it was kind of twofold. I mean, here's the thing: I think the deep down, the reason was he loved Mary Jane more than Gwen Stacy. That's kind of the deep down why. But no, in reality, the real logistical reason he gave was he suggested killing characters that people love and would miss versus like, oh, someone's gonna die and Spider-Man's gonna feel bad, but you don't want it to be like kind of an like he always would joke like, there's Aunt May, and like we know we're supposed to care about Aunt May. Of course, before we really put in the legwork on Aunt May at this time, it was just like Aunt May's just like she's always the stakes. That's usually what Aunt May is, like the stakes of the doting aunt, but not really like beloved in the sense of like we should care about her, but we spent time with Gwen. We've seen Gwen and Peter, hang out. We've seen like we get why, Peter loves Gwen Stacy. We spent time with the Stacy's family and the whole thing. So if we lose a character that we really care about, we would never in a million years suspect would actually die. It's going to have much more of an impact. And like he would always joke like Stan, because Stanley was a little perturbed by this because this happened while he was like out of the country. Like he was gone. They kind of did this without running it by him. And they're gonna think we have something against the Stacys. Like you killed the father, and now we're killing the daughter. So basically, Romita's response to this was, "Stan, they're still talking about it."
I think there's something interesting in regards to that moment, and also I think to Ramita's logic, because I definitely can understand like Aunt May, she's such an like already at death's bed
Yeah,
or death's doorstep, or just she's like the whole running gag is like, oh god, like when is she not like frail and like sickly? That's like moments that stand out when you're reading old Spider-Man comics. But for Gwen Stacy, I think also another factor is that like for people, for young kids and young teens reading Spider-Man from Stanley Ditko or when Romita was on the book, Peter Parker was sort of the everyman, the character that readers can see themselves in. And so Gwen Stacy, that for some readers they may have had crushes on, or they Gwen Stacy reminded them of someone that they had a crush on in real life. So I think the brilliance is that like in Gwen Stacy, dying, and Spider-Man losing Gwen Stacy, for the average reader who was invested in Spider-Man and invested in Gwen Stacy, they were losing Gwen Stacy, even if they was just a fictional character. But with Romita having that background or romance comics, I definitely can see when you look probably at specific panels or issues where just Peter and Gwen talking, or Peter and MJ talking, the way that it's structured, the way that it's laid out panel wise. Romita was putting in all his experience and training for the romance comics section of the industry into making these feel like actual human beings, falling in love and dealing with the pitfalls of love. And that I think really captures readers and makes Romita's side of the Stanley run so pivotal, so important, because there's that raw human thing that just animates the whole thing.
yeah. I mean, in connection to that too. Again, just to kind of recap it. So again, like falling in love. I mean, again, the face of Tiger hit the jackpot. Probably the most iconic character introduction ever in comics. You know, just it's the whole like thing of like we built her up, but just the fact that he said our hero is rendered speechless. See, after he's been trying to avoid her like the Dickens, she's there and says, "Oh, come on, face it, Tiger, you hit the jackpot." Just the whole like the line is perfect, and the girl looks amazing. Apparently, she was modeled after Anne Margaret. So essentially, what Romita did a lot. There's an actor too. I'm blanking on his name for Captain Stacy. Like again, he didn't model the core of the characters off of like real people, like usually either like romance like movie posters or like kind of like actors in movies and stuff, and that's kind of where he got a lot of the ideas for certain compositions in his romance days, as well as kind of like character creation. Obviously they took shape and became their own thing, but it's kind of interesting. There's like a little again, like how can you deny Anne Margaret? When you're looking for like, yeah, let's go with that for Mary Jane. Just again, it fit like a glove.
Yeah, so the actor you were looking for George Stacy is Charles Bickford.
Ah, that's the one. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting to see like how many of these like character designs were influenced by the media of their own time.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, it was a really again. It's kind of you have to imagine it's kind of how we. I know it's kind of retroactively now what we do with things now. Try to match up like how characters look to their movie counterparts, within the MCU and the comics these days. But yeah, it makes sense if you can create characters from scratch. Would be a way to go about it.
Well, I mean, that's always sort of been the norm in comics, really from the beginning. Like I think like Captain Marvel was based on like Fred McMurray. Sinestro was based on David Niven visually. And it's the raw comics. I
I
think
had no idea he was based off David, but now you say it, I can absolutely see it. Like, yeah,
yeah,
dear God, he looks so much like David Niven. That's crazy.
yeah. And throughout comics, like certain artists will visually, like for example, Wolverine is based off of like visually is very much based off of that one hockey player in the Paul Newman movie that I think Puck
Is it
or no,
Slapshot or is it
Slapshot, yeah, the
right?
one
Okay, I
uh,
mean, of course, on the animation side of things, for example, you have like Luthor in Lex Luthor in Superman the Animated Series. He's based off Telly Savalas.
yeah,
Yeah,
and right, and then like when Ultimate's coming out, like all the characters were like visually based off of like
Sam Jackson with Nick Fury, and we saw how that worked out. He's getting the Disney Plus show now.
yeah, which comes out in just
Few
within
weeks.
just 2 weeks time. Yeah. So, and what's funny is that when you actually kind of mentioned about Luther, I think this is a brief tangent. We'll go back to talk about Ramita. I think when Lex Luthor was being transitioned or put into the evil businessman role, the criticism that people had was like, oh, you're just making Lex into like skinny Kingpin,
That's
and
probably
it
how it works.
and it kind of just is it just shows like how influential Ramita's contributions were to the comic medium. The fact that like, oh, a character making a transition from a mad scientist to an evil businessman would be considered a lesser version of your character. That's like that shows how such pivotal. And MJ, I think when I recall images about like how Ramita draws her and like just her movement, the way she just bounces around from room to room, uh, it's crazy that because consider this from this perspective. John Romita, when you look at it, he's born 1930,
Mhm.
and so when he's doing like the Spider-Man comics, he's a middle-aged guy, and yet when you just read, the dialogue and granted you have to look at the context of the time, it doesn't feel out of place for teens that are in the same position as Peter, MJ, and Gwen to talk like that and move like that and think like that. And I think it's very a testament to Ramita being, while being an older guy, just and creating and focus on characters that are much younger than him, but having much, youthful pursuits and adventures, it still felt, authentic and just overall iconic. And the fact that we're just kind of recalling and talking about particular moments in his run is a testament to, like, yet again, like how influential and how pivotal of an artist he is to not just Spider-Man but the medium as a whole.
Certainly. So here's the thing. Let's. I figure what we should do is probably highlight a few extra the huge milestone moments within. I guess maybe during the Spider-Man stuff, and then we'll just transition to some of the other Marvel stuff that he did.
Mhm.
So, of course, it's interesting that again with you have like between Doc Ock and the Green Goblin, we've had kind of these big moments with characters in conjunction that he had created. Of course, death of George Stacy in the comics at the hands of Doc Ock by accident because they're fighting, like some I think some brick like falls on them and kills him. Then we have the Green Goblin scene. Of course, we have the big moment, one of the most iconic shots. Oh, I love it. It's a brilliant cover, and I'm pretty sure it's in the book too. And we adapt it all the time, and it's great. Where the Green Goblin discovers Spider-Man's identity, and he basically is like, he goes after him. You have this money shot of like Peter Parker exposed and vulnerable, like the face is unmasked. You can see the costume tearing through the shirt and everything as Green Goblin has it like wrapped around like a cable as he's flying around on the glider. It's a flawless composition.
Mhm.
You know, we already mentioned again, so the death of Gwen Stacy. Obviously, I mean the big thing too. Here's the thing. I should note this too with Romita Seniors. It's one of those annoying things where so. Again, so Romita again, he's penciling is renowned, but he's also a very gifted inker, and that was very much one of the things. Apparently, one of the big things he brought to it was he's very known for like drawing with kind of a certain like brush or like kind of a brush tip pen of sorts. That's kind of what he mainly used, which I'm sure helps in the inking process as well. And that was kind of what he used to draw a lot of the time. So you'll notice at a certain point, he basically did mostly covers for Spider-Man. The guts of the book were made to look like his style because again, that was the house style for Spider-Man. So you have like a Gil Kane, for example, was kind of his protege to a degree. Gil Kane was like the next guy in line for the book, so he did the guts of the book while he did the covers, and Romita would ink the book. So it's very much in tandem with that. So that's why there's so many great comics you look at and you think like, oh yeah, so Romita Sr. He did the whole Death of Gwen Stacy comic. Well, I mean, kind of, pretty. I mean, he inked it. He inked it and he did the great covers for it. But the inside of it was just something that looked remarkably like. It gets confusing after a while. Is my operative point here.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless, still, just again the killing of Gwen Stacy, the whole neck snap thing. I mean, I don't know how much of that was. Lee wasn't there. I don't know how much of that was our writer on. Was it Gene?
Jerry Conway.
Jerry. I always keep the way he spells Jerry. So I'm always thinking Jerry with a J, and it's never Jerry with a J. But yes, Jerry Conway. It's probably Conway. I don't know who staged. I don't know if that was going to be more Conway or maybe Romita having some influence on that, or if it was just Gil Kane completely. But however they did, the famous neck snap. Something really cool though. Everyone always forgets this because the other covers. Well, to be frank, the other covers possibly better, if not more iconic. You have Amazing Spider-Man number 121, Amazing Spider-Man number 122. 122 is like the Green Goblin's death, but the cover of that is Spider-Man holding the dead Gwen Stacy in his arms, swearing revenge. Now, 121 is a great cover too, and that's where she actually dies. That cover is Spider-Man like he's rushing towards this horizon. The horizon is like all the faces of his loved ones and all the supporting characters in Spider-Man. With Spider-Man saying, something tantamount to, "I can't believe one of my loved ones is about to die," or like he doesn't know like one of his loved ones is about to die, but he doesn't know who, which is an insanely great sell for a comic.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing what that pays off in, at the very end of that story where she dies so unexpectedly, it's brilliant. And it also has urgency and everything. The melodrama, it's melodrama in a page, is what it's all about. And again, we also have kind of like 100, the Spider-Man 100, which is on our poster image here, which is kind of a great iconic shot, which we have recycled a few times. I have a T-shirt of this, and it's also it was kind of one of the big moments for Spectacular Spider-Man. We had like the big black suit saga.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. I guess one more Spider-Man thing we should. The wedding, that was him. Spider-Man and Mary Jane get married. Nice little cover. That kind of came back for that one.
Didn't Jim Shooter write that?
Yeah, Shooter wrote it, but I just mean he did the Romita did the cover on it.
Basically, John Romita Sr. worked with a lot of writers.
Exactly.
That basically proves that he was like good with working for pretty much any of the writers writers who were doing work at Marvel.
Yep, and occasionally had some really good, really good ideas as well. Just like suggested like a Kingpin there or a Gwen Stacy death there. He gets around.
What is really cool is just like it's just if you just take the heart out, you couldn't tell it's a Spider-Man comic, right? You could have just been a regular like romantic, comic.
Exactly, yeah.
But the fact that you have like the heart-shaped spider, it's just such a great moment. And I'm looking through just in Google Images, like the fact that there's versions of the cover where it's like just Spider-Man holding onto Mary Jane with her wedding dress and Spider-Man heart in the background. It's just clearly like Romita Sr. just knows how to make an iconic image that just burns into the collective consciousness of readers and fans alike.
That he did. So that's the thing. So again, he become the definitive Spider-Man artist for sure. I mean, honestly, I would argue he became the definitive artist in the comics that were striving to maintain that style until Todd McFarlane rolled around. I think that's like I want to say that was the big shakeup. Like around that point, I forget if McFarlane was before or after the Clone Saga. I can't remember.
I think McFarlane was like a few years before. It was like early 90s.
That's the thing, is I think he was before. That's why I think it's like a direct cutoff. Like we're kind of like Gil Kane is still very much serving the Romita Sr. look, and then you have Todd McFarlane coming along who really changes things up. That's what I think happened.
Yeah, because Tom McFarlane did issue 300, and that was that was actually in 1988. So it might have just been maybe like a year or two. I don't think. Yeah, because he had to transition to Spawn, but yeah, I think definitely for most of the 80s, it was that Gil Kane, John Romita Sr. house style for Spider-Man that carried over for that decade.
Yeah. I mean, that's also kind of the other thing when you look at it too. When you look at like just the Raimi movies, for example, which kind of represent eras of Spider-Man to a degree as well. When you look at it, it's like Spider-Man 2 is all about Romita Sr. era Spider-Man, and then you get Spider-Man 3, in which again we're bringing Venom, and that's very much like the change. It's very much like okay, that's where we're very much kind of like we're bringing in Venom and stuff, and like we're kind of transitioning from classic Spider-Man then to the black suit stuff, which is when the game changes for him.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. So let's talk about some of the spin-offs and some of the kind of broader Marvel stuff that kind of comes about thanks to Ramita. So first off, we got to start with the Punisher.
Mm-hmm.
So the Punisher, it's an interesting thing where there's an outline for the character in which we want a guy. He's looking very tactical, and we're going to put a skull and crossbones on his chest. And of course, I forget this is before or after the character Crossbones for Captain America or not, but you have a character that could very easily become a knockoff of that guy, which you don't want. So Ramita Senior comes up with the idea of like, okay, let's make the skull super prominent. So we're going to enlarge it here, and we're going to. Then he came up with a really brilliant idea of like, let's go for the body armor look, in which we're going to give him like kind of like the teeth of the skull going down, being like a tactical ammo belt and or like kind of bulletproof kind of plating of sorts. And it kind of really helped make the character, really stand out. I mean, he made that skull. I mean, as iconic a symbol as it is. It's people love that skull for better or for worse. They love it. Yeah. Right. Let's see. So again, some other. So again, going from the guys who are shooting bullets like crazy. Let's look at the guys who are bulletproof. Let's talk about Luke Cage.
Yeah, I didn't realize Luke Cage was co-created by.
It's interesting. Here's what happened with Luke Cage. Luke Cage, at the very least, the beginning of Luke Cage. I don't know how long he stayed on the book, but the initial design of Luke Cage is Romita. And here's the fun thing: is that Romita, looking back on it, kind of like we do with the Luke Cage show, he pretty much realized, the way he designed Luke Cage, it looks like a runaway slave. But again, he's so glad the character stuck around and rose the prominence to the fact that they could look back on him and see like what we're doing now is better than what we were doing then. But still, it's a fact. I think I still would argue, even what we see in that Luke Cage gag in the Luke Cage show when we kind of put him in the actual outfit and everything, make that joke, the self-referential joke. So it's still a pretty good look because Luke Cage's color is yellow, and again, I don't know, the whole Power Man look. It's very 70s blaxploitation. I don't know. I still think it works. Obviously, it's not something you really maintain on a regular basis. I realize that, but still, it's.
I feel like a modernized version of the classic '70s look could work because you can you can. I think you can have like a yellow button-down shirt, maybe short sleeves. Maybe the metal, the tiara and headbands, I think could work. But I think just for Luke Cage to just even though yes, it is kind of the runaway slave, it is kind of a very provocative look.
It is, and that's the thing. That's what he was going for, and I like that. He recognizes that, and that's why he did that. And again, it's still Luke Cage. Obviously, it was a big thing to give an African American character like it before. This is way before Falcon. Really, Falcon was around, but he didn't get like a lead title, and the only lead title you had was Black Panther. And even then, again, I was an African character, not an African American character, and this kind of goes into the whole thing of like John Romita. Like many of the Marvel artists, but especially I would attest like more than the majority of the Marvel artists. This guy was like as New York as it gets. Like Romita, like he went all throughout the boroughs of New York. I mean, he went all over the place. He's a Brooklyn guy, and then there was Queens. He went from Brooklyn to Queens to Long Island. He went all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm saying, like kind of like representing. Like it was a big thing. So I don't know, it's kind of fit into that. So then you have, I think one of the unknown contributions Romita had, Wolverine. He technically designed Wolverine.
The original costume and the idea of
The original costume, and I mean he would draw him, later on in kind of the revised costume. I don't think he did the revised costume. I think he was really good at drawing it once someone came up with the revised, like the big kind of like ear mask thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the original look in 181 that was Romita. He added the whiskers and like a little mask.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a good look. I mean, mainly for like I think the coloring of it all, but again, that's I don't know how much of that was in his purview. But yeah, it was. Again, it's the foundational. Again, we're going from like kind of prototypes and the foundational elements, which I think broadly what he brought to the Marvel universe was outside of like the big landmark stuff like Spider-Man and Daredevil was he knew how to make the tweaks that really made him shine. He was the building blocks or like kind of the little extra spice added to it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like again, one other costume thing comes to mind. Black Widow. He came up with the because Black Widow. I don't know if anyone remembers. She appeared technically the original Black Widow appeared in Iron Man comic. She had like a real dumb design. It was like kind of like fishnets and like a mask or something. It didn't look
And
right.
she was like clairvoyant, or was her name? It was
Yeah,
like clairvoyant split, like Claire's the first name and Voyant is the last name, or something dumb like that.
yeah, it was something along those lines. It was something kind of like silly. So the fact is like he revamped. He gave her the big revamp that gives her a look that we recognize her for today. Put her in the in the spy suit and giving her like the stingers, like the little wrist mounted widow stings.
With like the red hourglass.
I don't know if he did the hour. I assume he did the hourglass. All I know is I saw like the cat suit and the little the gauntlets. But you have to imagine he had to have had like the hourglass too, right?
Let me just see.
Also, you can tell Romita definitely has a thing for redheads still, with Black Widow.
Don't we
I don't.
all?
I don't think. Well, true. I mean, I don't think the original Black Widow was a redhead, which is why I bring that up. So I think that was
Yeah,
like
I think the
probably another.
clairvoyant was like a blonde, and
So
then
yeah.
yeah. Oh, he doesn't have. There's like, so I guess the red hourglass thing was later, but
Yeah.
yeah. I
Still,
guess
it's a step in the right direction. That's what I'm saying. He's building. He's in the building blocks section with the
yeah.
Marvel Universe. He's getting us there.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so there's one major thing I think there's left to discuss with Romita Sr. But let me ask you this: do you have anything else you want to mention character wise before we get into kind of the legacy factor with him?
No, I think we're good to talk about the last thing.
Okay, so yeah, we got to talk about his son. We got to talk about John Romita Jr. In relation to his father. Because as I said, I have not. Sadly, I've not met John Romita Jr. Yet because every time he was supposed to come to the convention, for a few years now, the pandemic did not help with this. He would cancel at the last minute. It's a shame because I got my stuff signed by Junior. It's just I never like my father like got the signatures for me way back when I wasn't able to see him in person though because I was like a panel or something or I was in a line for someone else. It was for some such stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So my point is, John Romita Jr. It's a fascinating relationship between father and son in so many ways when you look at it here because you have like two either definitive or memorable legacies on both characters, Spider-Man and Daredevil. I mean, one could argue it's a definitive take on Spider-Man for Romita Sr., where it's a definitive take on Daredevil for Romita Jr.
Mm-hmm.
Then you kind of swap on the other side as well. So it's so interesting because what happened was Junior would, as a boy, he would watch and help his father plot the issues of Daredevil that he worked on in his run. He would like they'd be going on family trips and stuff, and he'd be like, and he'd like they'd be talking of the story and stuff. So Junior definitely had like a love affair with Daredevil as well, and what I find so charming, and this is me reading into it here, what I find so charming is I like to think that years later, he's a 10-year-old boy seeing his father work on Daredevil and kind of falling for the character. Is that years later when he does the Man Without Fear comic, which obviously heavily influences the Netflix Daredevil and everything, is that a lot of that is the Matt and Jack story, the Matt Murdock and Jack Murdock kind of flashbacks, and a lot of that's in the Man Without Fear book. And I like to think perhaps that father-son bond is very much in tribute to his father working on Daredevil. That's always been kind of my headcanon with that. So seeing his father work on comics all the time really inspired him to draw. And this I found so interesting is that his father never wanted him to become an artist because of the fear that he'd be in his shadow and he would second guess himself and it would hurt the relationship if he didn't make it into the industry. If like the industry chewed him up and spit him out, and then there would be like this thing like they can never really talk about comics again, like at the dinner table or something,
And also not to mention the accusations of nepotism.
Well, I was about to get to that, Jacob. So that's the thing. he according to Romita Sr., I listened to like some interview he did today, and he said that his son did take it on the chin quite a lot in the early days when he started off, and he was so proud of his son too. Like, he didn't like snap at anyone, and really like brushed it off. They would always say, "You're only here because your father's John Romita Sr." And he had to take it, and he went for it, and he crafted his own style. And again, the senior is just so ridiculously proud of his son. My point is like Senior was such a good father, and it's such a unique situation. And seeing that, he gave his son distance to create, he never pushed him into certain things. Ramita would mentor a lot of people, like Greg Capullo, for example. He mentored Capullo in his early. He got him work. He would help artists out, but only artists that he saw talented. Not like he would avoid nepotism at all costs. He would avoid like pushing his son things that the fear that would rob him of his craft. And it's just such a unique situation that we have like a father son kind of duo in the field of comics, and being such remarkable artists who have had such an impactful run on these two characters and more, but mainly these two characters. Yeah. I mean, how do you feel about Junior, Rohit?
Junior, I certainly will say that for certain characters, I do like his art more. I think in recent times, I don't love his art style as much, but I think for me, Junior, when he's on his peak, he's really on his peak.
I mean,
And
I'd say his peak is probably Man Without Fear and the JMS run of Spider-Man, wouldn't you?
yeah, I would agree with that as well. And I think you can definitely see a lot of his dad's influence, but certainly him crafting his own identity. And it's always kind of interesting to see compare father and son sort of contributions to the art, because not just Romita Senior and Junior, there's also the Kuberts, and I just think it's just always cool to see sort of how for Senior to have such a big legacy, it's good for Junior John Romita Jr. in his own way to craft his own legacy that continues on from his dad, but is setting his own path. You know.
Absolutely. So I guess we'd probably be closing things out here, because I mean that's the thing. We could be here all day if we really wanted to dissect everything that Ramita Senior did. But I think this is kind of like a good service of kind of like the things that I think really, at least for us personally, left some of the biggest impacts. I'm sure it's gonna be like kind of like a could have had a V8 moment of like, oh, we could have mentioned that. Or only had I known that he worked on that. But yeah, I mean that's sometimes you have like a legend like Mia Senior again, like going all the way to '93. He's there's going to be a lot of there's going to be a lot there. There's going to be a lot there left on the table. You know.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Roy, do you have anything you want to say to close out before I do, or?
There is this one cool story that
Sure.
I just saw that I wanted to share. So, within a day or two of Rami's death, an individual shared that when they worked at Marvel, they oversaw this like one comic that featured the Punisher and the rap artist Eminem.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day, Eminem's manager emailed him with a photo of the art of John Romita sitting beside a toilet. He was told it was Eminem's bathroom, and that Eminem was actually a massive Romita Senior fan. And Eminem's agent asked if he could help, having Romita Senior sign a bunch of Eminem's personal comic collection. The guy had to call John Romita Jr. first to get permission. He okayed it, and then he called Romita Senior, and he didn't know Senior had even mail. He just only talked to him on the phone, and he asked Romita Senior if he knew who Eminem was. He said no, and the guy told him that Eminem is a super popular rapper. It was this 8 Mile movie, and asked Romita Senior if it would be okay for Eminem to send him the comics for him to sign. And Romita Senior's response was, "Fan's a fan," Senior said, and then he signed just a huge stack of comics.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's really nice. Anyway, yeah. So let me. I guess in closing, I just want to say that John Romita was just he was a good guy drawing comics. It's just when you look at it, he was very down to earth again, being the consummate kind of New Yorker that he was. I guess to some degrees that the way he looks at it all at the end of the day is that it was, superheroes were another job, and again, in an industry that was very much in the beginnings, in which you kind of went to it. It was like, you went from like one genre to another, and you never could tell like how long it was going to stay on, just given how turbulent the 50s were for comics in terms of like stay power and legacy and everything. But it was, to him, it was like a pleasant surprise that it stuck around and it evolved, and I'm so glad he was able to witness just how long superheroes had endured and kind of shifted and everything, seeing his own son grow into prominence in doing so, and it's I mean, we have two generations of Ramita, which is crazy, like all that talent in that family. And I was and that, it's like I said kind of far earlier on, the man was very much a successor to Jack Kirby, and that and Kirby mentored him a little bit on Daredevil and vice versa. He
Mhm.
kind of returned the favor and kind of put goodwill back in the industry, and mentoring, folks like, Greg Capullo, and I'm sure, others, probably Gil Kane as well. And just like, helping out everyone else, kind of passing along the gift, so to speak. So again, he may not have been the king, but he was a prince of a man, that Ramita Sr. And it's just like everything, every time I hear these Ramita stories, and like the one you just said, it's like at the end of the day, Rita Senior is just everything you want from an artist, because when I hear him speak about the art style and everything, when he looks back on his work, he sounds so much like the best of artists, in terms of like he's seeing, he can see the faults in it. He can see the faults, and he can see what he wants to do better. And he can kind of see the shifting in the art style again, going from like playing scared, like trying to imitate the Ditko stuff, to doing his own thing, being comfortable in the book, and then just kind of like looking at all that. And because of that, because of like like a guy who's like looking at the artistry and looking at the art style as being a true blue artist, I still hope the guy saw both Spider Verse movies, at the very least one of them, just to see just like the impact and like the varying degrees of style. It's like the idea other people are going to come to these characters and kind of leave their impact and then be gone, but they'll kind of be represented and being celebrated for decades afterwards. Like, again, like we literally have a moment in the new Spider Verse movie where it's like, hey, here are like the like pillars of Spider-Man, the canon events of Spider-Man. These are the things that must happen in a definitive Spider-Man story, and any roundabout way. And like half of them are like stuff that's in relation to stuff that they create. Maybe more than half, but I have to see the movie again to kind of freeze frame what's on those webs. But essentially, you got like, again, Spider-Man No More. You have the death of Gwen Stacy. You have the Captain Stacy things. At least three of the six little web sections are him already.
Mhm.
It's crazy how that works. And at the very least, I hope wherever he is, he knows. Wherever he is in the Spider Verse, maybe hanging out Madam Web somewhere. Who knows? I hope that he knows the impact that he had, both for not just Daredevil and Spider-Man, but just across the industry, and as an artist and as a human being, how loved and still loved he is. I'll say this: the last remote interaction to like a thing the man has put to paper that I saw, or put to celluloid, I guess, that I saw, was I was at a convention last year, and I saw this beautiful framed piece that was from Spider-Man the Animated Series, which again is a show that took some influence from him, and took a lot of influence from him, and signed on the. It was signed. I had to pick between the Stan Lee image. It was a gift from my father, and he loved Stan Lee, so I went with the Stan Lee image. It was between that from Spider-Man the Animated Series and this other piece, which had both the father and the son having signed this Spider-Man the Animated Series cell. And it was great, and that's like the last thing is that, now I wish to God that had found the found the funds to get both, but still, it's just the fact of, it's like the last one of the last things I can. It's not the last thing ever he signed. I'm sure it was like the last time I saw. I was thinking about, oh man, how great! Thinking back to the pleasant encounter I had with Romita Sr., and just like him kind of putting pen to paper, so to speak, on the Spider-Man character. Is like, yeah, he's still such an impact, and he's going to be missed. He lived a great. I hope he lived a great life, because it was sure great for us. It was, one could say, not even great. It was amazing. Thank you, Jazzy John Romita.